Hi there folks, Steve here. Yeah, just out in the woods again, lovely place. It helps me to think and helps me to be able to just speak from the heart. Always taking into consideration the nature and my thoughts, and it's a good way to get some fresh air. It's perfect lighting out here, I think. Not too bright, not too dark. The sound's good as well, the acoustics. The trees create a nice effect, and that's really a nice thing. I don't know if it's going to be a little bit strange, if it's a bit strange, you know, to walk all the time with the videos and that, so maybe I just take little breaks and hang around for 5 minutes each time. Yeah, as you know, I've been putting up these law videos, or maybe you don't. I've got a couple of playlists, in my playlists. Law spelt with an R-E. Yeah, okay, so maybe some of you have seen the film Life of Brian, and that was a wonderful scene that just stayed with me and just came back again. The scene where Brian takes his mother to the preachings and the stoning, and the mother says, "Oh, let's," you know, she wants to go to the stoning to watch the people get stoned, you know, with rocks and stones thrown at them as a punishment. And Brian is not, you know, he goes along with it. He says, "Okay, I'll go along with that." And but women are not allowed at the stonings. And Brian says, "You know, why aren't women allowed at the stoning, Mum?" And she says, "Oh, because it's written. Because it's written." So then you know, it gets me thinking. Because something's written, how does it become law? Now, you probably heard the word statute or act of Parliament. How does an act become law? Well, law is the Latin word for written words, really. And if you keep your word, if you keep a contract, if you write down and agree with somebody else on a contract, on a written agreement to perform some duty, or as a value for equity, you know, like money or debt, all these types of papers are contracts, really. And so the one thing that protects contracts is copyright law, which is probably one of the first laws invented that comes along with paper and ink. So how can copyright how can copyright possibly cause an act to be enforced? Right, well, an act is a defined performance. For example, the act of driving. The act of driving is whatever it's defined as, say, controlling a motor vehicle in the act of commerce. And that act would be defined as an act, just like in theatre, Act 1, Act 2, but cut up into individual acts and defined. Now the act is written, but it still doesn't become law. It becomes law when you breach the copyright. Right, but you haven't signed anything. So somebody's got this piece of paper somewhere saying, for example, the act of walking down this path, making a video blog for YouTube. And so I write that act down and I become author of that act. Yeah, so if you copy that act, then you are in breach of contract. You might think it's a silly way of doing things. But obviously I could say I'm not doing the act that you say because I speak a different language. I'm doing the same thing, but I'm doing it in Russian because I speak Russian. So obviously you can't, you know, there's difficulties when you're using wording, because the idea being is if you copy, you have to prove, they have to prove that you've copied the act. But if you don't speak the language, then you're not going to be copying a language that you can't speak. So the first little copyright joinder thing is the language itself. If you speak English, and especially if you was raised in a school and educated and got your English degree, it's kind of acquiescing or consenting to the fact that you understand the English. Probably some of you have already heard of legalese, the legal language. It's almost impossible to understand for anybody really, probably. It's very similar to normal English, except the words are legal definitions that sometimes have got a very twisted meaning on them. And so this is already the first trap, is that you're presumed to be speaking the legal language that they're asserting on you. So obviously if you don't speak that language, if you don't use that dictionary, then that presumption can be taken away. Or you can just simply say, no, I'm not copying you. You know, I'm not... It's free to walk down the street with a video camera and make a video blog for YouTube. So the act of doing that should belong to the common domain. But you see, you know, like the act of smoking marijuana, it's an act, and if you copy what's already been written, then you're breaching copyright if you haven't got then the license, yeah? You see, so if you get a driver's license, it gives you copyright license to copy the act of driving as defined by the Driving Act, you see? You know, you can copyright anything, you know. For example, you know, you could copyright that and then do people every time they did that. You would say, no, you can't. But it's already been done. You know, it's no secret. It's just that most people, or all of us take a while to actually recognise it in the world, because we're born into it, you know. So that's where acts, even the fact that an act becomes law is an act in itself. The act of making an act law is an enforcement act. And that's probably where maybe some of you have heard that, what's the sentence now? Statutes are rules of a society given consent by the governed, or whatever it is. Basically it means that we should be consenting to the rules that are put onto us, no matter what they are. Because rules, we've been through this before so I won't dwell on it, but as you know, there's a big difference between murdering somebody or hurting somebody or not paying tax. But these days, you know, the two are very mixed together. And again, it's back to the life of Brian, you know, why do you have to pay your tax? Because it's written, you know? And because it's written, and because she's just accepted it, that's total acquiescence, you see? And that's where it gets you. So, that's why I do the law thing, really. It's not, law's very drying. Law, it's very drying. As soon as I mention to people, oh yeah, you know, you should get into the law, you get your power back. People think, you know, it's like working a computer. And it is. It is. I'm not going to say you can win just by learning a few tricks and stuff. But it empowers you to understand the rights you have got, so that you don't mess things up trying to keep the rights, you know, because a lot of people, they've got this attitude, pardon my language, but the idea is don't fuck with me and I won't fuck with you. But if one starts first, the thing escalates and it's like two kids fighting. So the justice system doesn't belong to anybody, it belongs to everybody, but in a way, you know, we've all got to have accountability and stuff. You can't just simply say, oh yeah, no, don't mess with me. But if you learn a little bit of the jurisprudence, you know, the actual fundaments of law and why it was even put there and stuff, it's basically down to reason, isn't it? You know, and I find most people understand the basics of law very well. It's just as soon as you start to get into statutes, acts, you know, administrative procedures that people just crack up, and which is the point where I've been following a lot of these people, these YouTubers. There's a lot of them out there studying the law in depth and trying to not really test the system, but free themselves from the law by not using driver's licenses, by not paying certain taxes, and a lot of these people are getting called kind of whatever you can imagine, all the worst names, but really they're interested in the liberty and freedom and justice, most of all justice. And that's one of the things that we're not seeing. We're seeing less of. You know, we're seeing groups of 5 policemen jumping on one kid for skateboarding on the wrong side of the road and then punching him in the face, you know, and this on camera. You know, there was that other incident in the school dining room where the lad's faced with, you know, maybe a possible 20 years for wiretapping, when it wasn't wiretapping, you know. But people don't really know what wiretapping or eavesdropping really means, and you only need to go onto Google and just click on the word wiretapping, and you'll see what a serious crime wiretapping is. But you'll also see that you can't do somebody for wiretapping when they're stood in broad daylight in public talking about everything that everyone can hear. So yeah, this one almost turned into a rant, didn't it? But you can see, you know, just because it's written doesn't mean to say it as an, you know, it can be enforced. Unless you just accept it, then it has been enforced by yourself. So that's why I encourage everybody to, well, you know, at least just have a little look through me law videos, or if not mine, then there's other people out there explaining their sort of interpretation of what they've found out, their take on it. Just, I think it, you know, at first people, I think, tend to think, you know, don't mess with things that can get you into trouble, sort of thing, you know, don't let the sleeping dogs lie and that, but they're not going to wake up by you asking questions. You know, you have the right to stop anybody, any civil servant, and ask them questions in a polite manner. You've got no rights, you know, over them. You've just got your own rights, which we always tend to waive all the time without knowing it. You know, you can't demand your rights from somebody else. You now have to kind of know what they are, which is kind of obvious to any human being, but we've had all of this obviousness kind of pushed out of us anyway. So I'm only really here to try and empower everybody else as well, to try and, you know, collect the dots and find any answers and stuff. And everybody can take part, everybody can recognise certain things that other people have missed, and everybody's got their own experiences, as small or big as they may seem. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Wish you a nice time, and don't be scared of the law. You know, don't be scared of it. We just need to represent each other and make sure that we're there for each other. To be witnesses, to be observers, to stand for the truth, because it's obvious that you know, individuals are going to get singled out, taken to courtrooms, taken to cells, be totally surrounded by people who are working for the enemy, kind of thing. You know, it's like trying to find justice from the father of the person who's done you wrong. You know, are they going to be biased? And you know, and to equal out that bias, people need representation. So yeah, there's something we can all do, even if we feel like we're really small and can't play a part. Every single view, every single like, every single subscribe click, every single bit of activity, in fact, every single effort pushes it forward, and it's fun. Anyway, yeah, have a nice time. Cheerio.